Hi, my name is Denese Duran. I'm a behavior assistant and a master in social work candidate for 2021. If you need some gems and the latest updates on pop culture and millennial everything, check out the Millenni-HER podcast. Make sure to subscribe and listen in because I love them girls.
You are now tuned in to Millenni-HER. The Millenni-HER. You are now tuned in to Millenni-HER podcast.
Rhythm on the instrumental.
Millenni-HER. You are now tuned in to Millenni-HER podcast. Tuned in to Millenni-HER. Tuned in to Millenni-HER podcast.
Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to another episode of the Millenni-HER podcast, joined by myself and my co-host Shirlz, who is not in studio today, but she is still here with us, so don't worry. She's booked, busy, and blessed. Hey, Shirlz!
Hey, Ari! Hey, team! I miss y'all!
But we are here for another episode. Episode is called Baked or Behind Bars. If you can't figure that out by the title, we are talking all things cannabis. We are talking about marijuana substance use that may turn into substance abuse and how to overcome that, what to look for in signs of your loved ones. And we thought it was a great episode to talk about, especially during the pandemic, stressors, things like that may get you more inclined to using these legal and illegal substances. So we're going to just get right into it. So let's get into our hot topics.
Hot in, so hot in here, so hot in.
So, Shirlz, we're going to get right into our hot topics. We want to know how are people coping with this pandemic? Obviously, I'm automatically thinking, because we're having an episode about cannabis, about substance use, we can assume that may mean some, legal drug use, illegal drug use. So I want to know, though, how do you think your peers are handling it? Or what are they using to handle?
I think personally that the sales on alcohol has increased a number, like their number has increased a lot because people are alone and people are buying more alcohol, buying more wine. Maybe when they used to buy like one bottle, which will last them a while, now they have to double up and buy 2 or 3. And also cannabis has been a thing because I know like a lot of people that own cannabis business have been selling more edibles, have been selling, maybe if you were buying a dime bag, you're buying like an eighth or more compared to before. So I don't know. What about you? What have you been seeing?
Kind of like what I have been doing myself, which is maybe some CBD oil, melatonin, obviously some wine if it gets really stressful for me. I haven't seen any or heard any of my peers using something that I would consider some harsh, never to touch substances, which are like heroin, meth, amphetamine, things like that. But I mean, I definitely see it, and that's a really big part to the pandemic. And then it even brings me to the point of thinking in some, socially, in a social aspect, what would, if you are smoking or you're engaged with your friends socially, still socially distancing, how would that puff pass rotation happen in pandemic style? Like, is it no more? Like, what's going on? You tell me.
I personally believe that, first of all, people might say it's BYOB, bring your own blunt, but they're bringing their own blunt and they're all smoking the same blunt. People aren't rolling up separately. And I think that one thing about the pandemic, it has taught us how we move is just strictly disgusting. Like we pass germs on a regular. Even when it comes to the rolling method, when you're rolling the blunt and you're licking that part and you're burning it and you're passing it to someone else. Regardless, I personally don't believe that smoking marijuana is a form of social distancing unless you're really on it and you're like, okay, I'm gonna roll my L and you're gonna roll your L, and then we're gonna face our own L's, but we're gonna keep the social aspect of us having conversations, of us
Right.
doing that. But 9 times out of 10, that's not happening. It's just like, oh, I bought a blunt, Shirley bought a blunt, so like
It's
we're
like
still sharing that one blunt.
right. So it's like almost, if it happens, it happens. If it don't, it don't. So, but that is also something that brings to the aspect of like, okay, how safe are we being? But that's a conversation for another day. But it's definitely just something where it's like, okay, clearly we figure it's not that deep in certain aspects because we're still doing regular scheduled programming when it benefits us. But that brings me to another point of shouting out
This is Jersey.
where our governor, Phil Murphy, Cheryl, share the news. What has happened with Phil Murphy? I feel like everybody knows by now, but go ahead, tell us.
I'm telling you, Phil has been doing his thing. He ran on with his campaign with him running for New Jersey governor. He said that he will legalize marijuana, and although his term is almost up, he's kept his promise. He legalized marijuana. He said that the reason why he was legalizing it was for social justice, for racial justice, for economic justice. And although he just announced on Monday, he signed the legislation on Monday. You know, of course, people in his comments is like, but what about my expungement? And it's like, it's gonna
Yeah.
come. We like
Hopefully.
we talked about in our politics episode,
Mhm.
our government officials are not our saviors. You know, like it
Yeah.
takes time. So just because he signed it, even when it comes to dispensaries, like just because he signed it doesn't mean a dispensary is gonna come open tomorrow. It's gonna take some time, but we have to accept where we are now. And he's legalized marijuana and he's working towards criminal justice reform. And that's a huge thing.
It's definitely some fine print in there that does need to be figured out. Even for example, with the whole you still can't buy it, but you can use it. So it leaves it. I was looking in the comments of NewJersey.com when it was shared on the governor's social media, where it's like, okay, what does that mean? It's just gonna magically pop up in my car? Like, what does that mean for, if I get caught with it, etc.? And I don't think they have that figured out yet, as far as like, okay, should you keep a receipt of when you buy, what you buy, or if it's something as simple as that, if you have it, it's kind of like, okay, as long as you didn't use it, or no, you can use it, but it's more so if I guess if they're not catching you in the moment, like purchasing it from your plug or anything like that, then it's you should be clean from there on out. So I definitely think it's a step in the right direction. I think we needed it, and everybody else is doing it, so definitely think it's something that we should applaud. And also with that conversation of things that aren't still socially accepted, which is the use of those harsher drugs I mentioned earlier, heroin, methamphetamines. I came across a person and an article on the New York Post where it was talking about some Columbia professor named Carl Hart, and he's talking about how his heroin use, he's come out talking about his heroin use being a great avenue for him to really get down a great work-life balance. And so he goes on to saying, I mean, he's esteemed, guys. He is a professor of psychology and neuroscience. He's a chair of the psych department. He's in his 50s. He's a father of 3. He's married. He's coming out with a book actually called Drug Use for Grown-Ups, Chasing Liberty in the Land of Fire, where he's even talking about just the use of heroin. Now, his perfect day is sitting by the fireplace at the end of a hard work day and doing a few lines of meth. I mean, not meth, heroin. So with that, it's like he's doing all of this under the guise that, okay, let's decriminalize these substances because it doesn't mean we can't function. It doesn't mean we can't still get things done. I don't agree with that in my life, as far as, especially as if you're a professor and you're, teaching kids and you're teaching them while you're high. Just off that, I can't get with that. But I think the conversation about, okay, it doesn't turn us into people that can't do for ourselves. I think that definitely leads to a conversation, and it definitely does add to that conversation of decriminalizing the people that have been put behind bars for these same exact crimes they've been found guilty of.
I can say personally for Oregon, I know recently it passed that Oregon decriminalized all drugs, not just
Wow.
marijuana, but all drugs. So that's like a thing where I know more progressive politicians are trying to pass, and they just want to change the narrative of being a substance abuser as a negative thing to more of a positive thing to them, like, actually extending to get help for their substance abuse. So I agree with you. I think that's a little bit it's a little bit extra, but it just has me thinking about marijuana and how marijuana has always been, the narrative behind it is always like it's a gateway drug to harder drugs. I personally want to ask you, what are your thoughts on that? Do you believe that marijuana is a gateway drug?
Do I believe marijuana is a gateway drug? Meaning, if I think it'll make me more inclined to trying other drugs, I do not think that is the case. I think you try what you think is popular and what you see in the media is socially acceptable, or what you think is something that your friends are doing. I don't think it has anything to do with the next person. You could say that about anything. Definitely it was a push in the media for a while, definitely in the 80s and 90s, but I don't think it's a gateway drug. I think it's actually now the drug that, like, as you can see, because most of the country has accepted it for recreational use, that they see like, okay, now maybe we should encourage people to use marijuana so that they don't use everything else that's out there that's actually killing people. I haven't heard one person say, I've been researching this since we said we were going to talk about this, and the real consensus is that marijuana doesn't kill people. So
I agree.
if you're saying that marijuana, if I'm saying and you're saying that marijuana doesn't kill people, you can definitely find numbers on heroin, meth, opioid, those different substances, alcohol killing people. So I think it's actually flipped. If anything, we are like, yes, use marijuana so that you don't use anything else.
I think I want to personally, later on the episode, we have a special guest, and I want to personally weigh in on that. But I do believe that marijuana can be a gateway drug to someone who has a generational, maybe their father was a strong drug addict, and the son is basically just smoking marijuana, or like we talked about offline.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about trauma. Like, trauma is real, especially during this pandemic where we have to live with this new norm.
Yeah.
So to me and you, we may be okay with the marijuana high, but compared to someone who has a family history of drug abuse, they may feel like the marijuana high isn't enough and they want more. So I can see in that aspect how it can be a gateway drug.
Okay. I like your perspective on things, but let's give people the facts, okay, listeners and watchers out there. So far, marijuana has been legalized in multiple states, medicinally in more than 35, not including New Jersey because that recently just happened. 15 states plus the District of Columbia is legal to buy and consume recreational marijuana. And that is waves of change since, like we talked about in the past, where it was hard to come by. Still ways to go. Like I said, that fine print is something we are still trying to mark, but definitely changes have been made. When I think of that, though, it's kind of what we mean by the fine print. What are the loopholes of it? And I have found just what you could have faced with a simple possession charge. So, for example, a lot of states exclude federal charges, but for simple possession charges, it could cost you a year in prison and or $1,000 in fines, even as a first offender. And any subsequent incidents might double in the sentence and tack on more time. So, and that's coming from the U.S. Sentencing Commission. So, what would you say is something that you think people should keep in mind as this new bill, just specifically in New Jersey, but obviously all over the country? What should people still keep in mind if they choose to engage?
I think people should keep in mind, like, just like alcohol, for example, like you have to be 21 to drink alcohol, and mostly anywhere. You can't be pregnant and be drinking. That should be the same with marijuana. For example, just like you shouldn't drink and drive, you shouldn't smoke and drive. And I feel like even when it comes to because Phil Murphy, he hasn't put out a statement about what's it going to be mean for, like, if you apply for a job in Jersey and you have to take a drug test, will they be testing marijuana or not? Because most jobs test alcohol,
Yeah.
even though we don't know that.
Yeah.
So I feel like there needs to be a fine line between that. And I think that it's up to the person to be responsible for themselves. Like, like, just be smart about it. Like, now that marijuana is legal, just still be smart. Don't smoke and drive. Don't be pregnant and you're smoking weed.
Gotcha.
Do it. Take accountability.
Still be responsible.
Be responsible when doing it.
Now let's switch gears a little bit. Tell me about kind of like what you mentioned about the gateway drug. Or it being considered gateway drug. Talk about the taboo that marijuana had, the stigma that marijuana had in the past, and how it has evolved in the future, in the present time.
I can speak for me personally on my personal experiences. Especially in the 90s, I'm a 90s baby. Marijuana was seen, it had a negative stigma. It was such a taboo, meaning like, I'm a product of the crack epidemic. Later on, we'll talk more about it, but like marijuana was labeled as a drug and like on the same level as crack. Anyone who smoked marijuana, it was just like, it was no like, oh, this is a holistic approach to anxiety. It was just like, it's a drug, it's wrong. We have to, lock up these drug dealers that's selling marijuana. It's horrible. But compared to now, where CBD, especially in Jersey, you go to Walgreens and you see CBD, but CBD has a portion of marijuana in it from the hemp plant. But marijuana has become more acceptable. I think during the hippie era, the hippie era painted marijuana as a peaceful thing, as a great thing, compared to when it came to Black communities, it was a negative thing. It was like, oh, this chronic is tearing our neighborhoods apart, and the war on drugs and everything. So that's my personal opinion on it. It's my personal opinion on it.
Okay. So I don't want our listeners and our watchers to think that, we're saying these things are necessarily bad. I mean, it's been proven, like we said earlier, that marijuana hasn't, in my opinion, hasn't killed people. So it can have its benefits. It has health benefits for sure, medicinally. Shirlz, you can add to this list that we have research, which is definitely it adds to PMS, pain relief. Obviously, still pressing that 0 fatality rate. It aids to anxiety, cancerous fights. So tumors, Alzheimer's, ADHD, Tourette's, things like that. Shirlz, can you add to that list?
Yes, and even glaucoma, or like you said, I think one thing with trauma, the pandemic has increased anxiety. And I just want to personally switch gears to the different strands of marijuana. As you know, there's sativa and indica. Indica is more for relaxation, sleep aid, compared to sativa strands, which are more heightened and jumpstarting for creativity and focus.
Definitely. I think that is great education for our listeners and watchers who are really versed in that category. But definitely for those same listeners and watchers, when we're talking about what you engage in, we're still talking about how you can get ahead of the curve. So even for something, because it's now legal to use recreationally in the state of New Jersey and in more than half the country, we wanted to give you a little gem on how you can make it a lucrative investment opportunity, or how you can become a licensed dispensary merchant like Jay-Z, like Whoopi Goldberg, like Snoop Dogg,
Snoop
Wiz
Dogg, like there's a
Khalifa.
couple people, even Biggie's son, the Notorious B.I.G., he's invested into Cookies dispensary, which is like a
becoming
big
more
strand of what a lot of people are smoking.
right. So I have some tea. So it's saying that obviously a dispensary is not easy to build. It's a hard task, and it's costly up front. But it's saying that the average dispensary can total up to $775,000 in startup money. It's heavily regulated, which we already knew. Business owners have to have permits and licenses in order as a prerequisite to owning. And if you failure to operate without the same permits and licenses can have steep fines and closures. Obviously, you don't want to do that. But definitely, if you are thinking of owning a dispensary, wanting to invest with your friend, definitely have at least $1 million in the bank or in capital so that you can engage in this opportunity. But just so you know how great it is, the average CBD sales is $535 million annually, and by 2022 it will have grown to $1.8 billion, which will be a 53% increase for annual growth in hemp-derived CBD products as well. And that's coming from CBD hemp experts. So definitely it's worth some conversation with your boss friends, your fellow boss friends, to explore. So if you do it, make sure that you share that the Millenni-HER podcast gave you those deets so that you knew how to level up.
This week's Black-owned business of the week is Bad Girl Creations. Bad Girl Creations specializes in creating customized marijuana paraphernalia. Their bundle box includes a grinder, rolling papers, rolling tray, and more. So make sure you support and let them know that the Millenni-HER podcast sent you.
Let's get into something that's fun, I feel, in the spirit of cannabis, marijuana. We want to figure out a game. Let's talk about some memories. Let's go down memory lane a little bit, Shirlz. So, Binsky, can you hit that little music? Thank you. Okay. Shirlz, start the game. Tell us what the game is.
Okay, so we have several games. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about our edible experiences and the most memorable edible experience. Share your funniest edible story.
You go first. Go
ahead,
first.
Ari. Share your funniest edible story.
Okay, my funniest edible story, it was like sophomore year, because I remember being in my college dorms, and I had took a brownie. I had got it from my friends in acting class. Well, they weren't my friends, but acquaintances. It was kind of surprising because it was somebody white who was selling them. So I was like, okay, if she white, I'm gonna definitely get messed up. I don't know why I thought that, but that's what I thought. So anyways, I bought a brownie. I took the brownie. I split it in half with my roommate, and I think I got the wrong half because I think mine had more of the weed in it, because my friend wasn't high, but I was. I was on our college buses, like eyes red, everything, and I was high until the next day. We had a whole event to go to, and I was still stoned, but it was amazing. And I realized that it's really real. Like, it will hit you, and ever since then, I stay away from brownies. That's my story. What's your story, Shirlz?
That's a great story. I think for mine, I have multiple funny edible stories, but I will remember this one because I'm such a big Nipsey Hussle fan, and this was the last I went to go see him in concert because he was performing at Broccoli Fest in Washington, D.C. And one of my friends who was the guest on our adulting episode, Kiwan, kept talking about this vegan edible brownie. So we go to this festival and we had a lemonade that was infused, and we also had a vegan edible brownie. So like this festival had her, Daniel Caesar. It was just so many Nipsey Hussle, Cardi B, so many people. So we're enjoying the concert, and it just hit all of us at the same time, and we all just got quiet, and we all just looked at each other and started like dying. And then for some reason we kept ending up in the line of like the food trucks, and we're just like, why are we
in this line?
And that will forever be my favorite edible story, because it took us so long for the edible to hit us, and when it did hit us, it hit us all at the same time, and we just
Done.
enjoyed the vibes. We were at a festival, and it was great vibes. So that's my favorite edible story.
Okay, well, we gave y'all a little bit of story time before we switch gears back to the serious notes of that it can be fun. It'll have its highs and its lows, but when it's low, it gets really low. And that leads from substance use to substance abuse. And so, like Cheryl said, we have a very amazing guest. Her name is Denese Duran. She will be up shortly to talk about what that really entails and what that life is like. But we just wanted to make sure that we told y'all that we're talking about substance use and substance abuse because it is prevalent, especially in the pandemic. You will feel pressured, you will feel stressed, and when depending on where you turn, it could lead you down a bad path. And with the millennials, we are very much affected. We are trying to be business owners. We are being entrepreneurs, things like that. And that really takes a toll on us. And there are some substances, like we said, that I admitted to that get a bad rep, which is meth. Shirlz can add in
opioids, crack, any prescription mental health drugs like Adderall. If there's abuse on that.
It is obviously a great investment opportunity for our listeners and our watchers out there if you so decide to become in this world that is basically being normalized. But also, let's take it back. Let's think about why it's even become trendy in the media. Shirlz, tell us who or what you think has made marijuana so acceptable.
I think what made it really trendy, as I said before, I'm a 90s child. So when Dr. Dre dropped the Chronic album, marijuana became a thing. Also Snoop Dogg, and kind of shifting more gears to like later 2000s, Wiz Khalifa when he dropped his mixtape Cushion Orange Juice. And that just made everyone, I think it's just California. We can just think California artists like Tupac. Like
the
anyone,
first time
like
we
Ice
think
Cube,
of California,
they made it trendy.
That's the first time we think of California for anything. but I could definitely agree and see why you would say that, because a lot of hip hop, I think, is what you're leading at, is that the hip hop genre in music is what really made it acceptable, is what was cool. That's what we were doing. That is how we set ourselves apart from rock, who was doing coke. Country, who was doing hair, meth or whatever. They had their own sticks, and MJ Cannabis just happened to be probably one of ours. So I can see you on that. But now, Bisky, play that game. Play the music. Because I wanted us to play a little game, and with that is, if you could have a scythe, Shirlz, I'm going to lead this to you because this is for you. I don't really do scythes often. If you could have a scythe with 3 celebrities, dead or alive, who would you choose?
I mean, you're talking to me who's like the biggest Tupac fan. So Tupac, Snoop Dogg, and Wiz Khalifa, because I'm a big Cushion Orange Juice is probably one of my favorite mixtapes. But my honorable mention, because I'm such a big fan, Jhené Aiko.
Okay. Those are some solid celebrities. Get you a little bit chill in the mood, get you turned up, ready to fight. It seems like a perfect
and have
balance.
Some great, dope intellectual conversations. Like, I would love to pick Tupac's brain.
It seems like you're Carl Hart. It's a perfect work-life balance.
So we have a special guest with us today, and he is
She's currently getting her master's in social work, and she knows a lot about substance abuse. I'm gonna let her introduce herself. Friend to the show, Denese Duran. Hey, Denese.
Hey,
Hi
Denise.
guys, I'm super excited to be here. Finally get to really talk to you guys and be on the Millenni-HER. I'm super excited. So my name is Denese Duran, and I am a podcaster as well as a MSW graduate student. So my background right now, I work as a behavior assistant with children with cognitive developmental issues, and I also intern at a substance and dual diagnosis facility. So I've been working in the dual diagnosis facilities probably a good 2 years now. And I have a certified drug and alcohol counseling certificate that I obtained where I study different types of drugs, different types of uses patterns. And I'm super excited to be here and talk to you guys about everything that pertains to substance.
Well, we are so happy that you are here. Just to catch you up, we've been talking about everything in regards to different substances that we use, whether recreational, for medicinal purposes, and we really spoke on its past stigmas, its present, how it's presently considered, i.e., just an example of marijuana, cannabis, and how it was looked at as being a terrible, terrible thing to try, and now it's obviously legal in more than half the country. So we just wanted to also make sure that we shed light and information on other substances that are still, I wouldn't consider them to be the best substances to use, but for those, it's reality. It's some people's reality. So we definitely just wanted to shed light on that. And so we wanted to bring you here to help us do that. So we have so we have somebody credible to validate our thoughts. So thank you so much. So let's get right into it. So with it, we wanted to know what do you think are common stressors that get people to want to maybe try illegal substances or substances in general? Because I don't even want to say illegal, because at the end of the day, alcohol, that's legal, and that's still something that leads to many deaths in the country. So what do you think the stressors, or what do you think is the reason why people even attempt to try these drugs?
There's a lot of reasons, I would say, and that's a great question. I would say one of the number one things that I see that happens a lot with substance use, and in the particular populations that I work with, it's trauma. A lot of trauma. A lot of people who've dealt with a lot of painful losses or suffering, or a lot of transgenerational differences. For example, you have people that have been through sexual abuse, sexual assault. They've been neglected. They've had instances where they don't have both parents in the home, or they're raised by a relative. I think that trauma is one of the number one reasons for substance use in a way. And then also mental health. Now, a lot of times when you talk about substance use and mental health, it kind of goes hand in hand. There's something called MICA, which is it's called mental illness, chemical abuse. So we're not sure sometimes if the mental health issue that has been not discovered, right? For many years, some people have suffered from anxiety, depression, and they don't know. That triggers the use, that triggers substance abuse, whether it be alcohol, like you mentioned, whether it be marijuana, cocaine, opioids, or heroin. We're not sure, because some people have never been to a therapist or been diagnosed, right? So
Right.
then that's one. And then the trauma offsets with, is it the mental health that's triggering the substance use, or is the substance use that becomes mental health issue? And this is something that's been an argument within our field. I mean, Shirlz is in my MSW program, and we take classes together, and that's something that's very intertwined. In the facilities that I work in, I work with a population of trauma, and a lot of the things that they kind of take to using is that trauma, like I mentioned, the neglect, the sexual abuse, just even sometimes peer pressure, even the social location that people in. So I think it's a variation of things, but I kind of want to hone in on trauma specific now because of the pandemic and the increase of things that I've seen clinically in the facility that I intern in. I talked about this. There's been like a good 10 to 15% increase in people using substances, whether it's illegal substances or illegal, because of the trauma that we're enduring right now within the pandemic. I miss hanging out with you and seeing you girls, and look at how we're talking. So I chose to talk about trauma as a stressor because it kind of unravels all these things. You have financial burdens, you have issues where it's stress. And sometimes when people are very stressed out, they need a release, and your body kind of wants that. Your neurotransmitters in your brain say, hey, let me get some of that serotonin. Let me get some of that feel good. So I think that is a great question. And I would say trauma, just because of the time period that we're in right now.
I would agree with that.
Since we're talking about trauma, and I think you brought some good insights to it, and you know the pandemic has been happening and people have been abusing different substances. So when do you think is the best time to intervene and possibly, have an intervention with someone, or maybe recommend them to a rehabilitation center?
See, I think that that's a very kind of one-on-one and person-to-person kind of thing, because when you look at substance use, and even diagnostically, it used to be called substance abuse. Now, you know that the Diagnostic Statistic Manual has a new term for it, which is substance use. Everything falls under substance use, and then there's dependency within that. And there's severity levels. So there's mild, moderate, and severe. Someone with a mild issue, there's 11 criteria that are met, that have personal, right, recreational, occupational, and social. So there's 4 sectors of your life that are affected by substance use. Now, it's either mild, moderate, or severe. Now, to talk about an intervention, you have to see where you're at. If you have a mild use, which is 2 to 3 of those 11 criteria. If you have 2 to 3, so you have a mild use issue, which can be you're occasionally drinking on the weekends. You might drove drunk once or twice. Now then you have a moderate, which is 4 to 6 of those 11 criteria. Now that's a moderate situation, kind of involves, you might have gotten a DWI, maybe 1, you might have gotten in trouble. Now, when you have 6 or more, it's severe. And I think with interventions, you have to have a severity level that has influenced every single part of your life, whether your job, your relationship, you've lost schooling, you have kind of in this kind of wallow of so many different things because of this substance, whether it's alcohol or marijuana. And with interventions, there's stages of change where, Shirlz, we talk about. There's people that are in stage 1, they're pre-contemplating. Oh, I don't have an issue. Maybe I do. Then they're in contemplation, like, yeah,
a lot of my friends.
Maybe I do. Then they go into the part of planning, which is planning to go to rehab, planning to go to a therapist. So I think to answer your question, it's when you see someone that's hitting all those sections of their life is being depleted, it's time to say something. I mean, also too, there's variation. There's people that you see that tell you, hey girl, I don't remember what happened last night. If that starts to happen more than often, you start to black out. And what happens in your brain, you start going in autopilot is what we call it, meaning your body's still functioning, but your mind is completely. So that's already abuse level. You've already abused alcohol to the point that you completely shut down certain logical things, like your prefrontal cortex, making decisions, which we know it takes to 25 for that to really develop. So I think, I love that question. You have to intervene when you see that person's not picking up the phone, that person's missing class, that person's got warnings from their job. People are all telling you like, hey girl, you were drunk last night. I think that once you see those things depleting, and that person has to want to too. If that person doesn't want to change, they're not going to change.
So that brings me to an interesting point that I think a lot of our listeners who are millennials in between the ages of 28, 35, when you visit the doctor, I feel like all of the things you were saying that falls under substance use and the different categories, that is definitely what some of the questions that are asked during an annual physical. For example, like I was saying, when you go to the doctor, those are the same questions that I was asked, at least, where, how many times would you say you drink in a week? Is it more social? Is it more than 2, more than 3, more than 4, more than, et cetera? I never say, I'm never completely honest. I will say that. Maybe it's just, I don't know. I always hesitate to be thoroughly, I guess, honest with doctors in general, but especially for that, I feel like it's because I don't want it to seem like it's getting to that conversation. But I definitely think that is a way to gauge if someone is turning their substance use into abuse. And I also thank you, before I know Shirlz chime in, is that thank you for saying what it is, because I was actually struggling with that term. I didn't want to say substance abuse because it doesn't necessarily mean you're abusing, when you're drinking, when you're, smoking. But I was just ignorant to the PC term, or the term that it should be called. So substance use, and it's so simple, but I didn't get it. So thank you for giving that knowledge to our listeners, and myself included.
I want to say real quick, and I thank you for acknowledging that there are different levels. Like, you have use, which is any type of consumption of alcohol. Then you have abuse, which I talked about. Someone continues to drink or smoke or whatever their choice when it's causing problems to them in their work, family, etc. Then you have dependency, which dependency is when people are overusing and their physical body will withdraw if they stop any kind of substance. So those are all in there, but substance use is the more PC term right now because it's kind of falling under all of that. So I appreciate you understanding that and getting it.
So Denese, since you talked about withdrawals, I wanted to ask you, what are like the setbacks and outcomes of going just straight cold turkey?
Well, I wouldn't recommend going cold turkey. It all depends on the substance that you are using. When it comes to opioids and heroin, you have a very difficult time if you are a user that uses consumptions daily. You can have seizures, you can even die if it's a long-term consumption. So I think a setback is, depending on what type of drug that you're using, specifically heroin, opioids, they're very dangerous to completely come off. That's why they have like methadone clinics, and they have different types of substances that kind of, fill in for that feeling and for that type. So I think like stuff like methadone is one of the things that they use for heroin, and they also have Noxicil, and it's just a very difficult drug to kind of overcome on your own. As far as marijuana and alcohol, alcohol could be more dangerous as well. So I would suggest, if you have a dependency, which those are the issues that I expected, that you have shivers when you don't have the substance, when you have fevers, you have cold sweat. Those are signs that you are dependent on a substance. And I would not suggest withdrawing without seeking help and seeking professional help. And as far as marijuana, cold turkey, I know people that have stopped completely, and it's been it was hard, but I didn't see any side effects of it. So I think, to answer your question, it depends on what substance you're using. I would say with heroin, opioids, because it's an opioid and it's very, very dangerous to kind of completely come off of it on your own. You would definitely need a substance or clinical help to really combat that.
And for our listeners, Denese, who may not know what going cold turkey or the extent of what going cold turkey means, can you share what that might look like?
What that means is just one day you just decide, after, let's say, many months or many years of uses, that you just completely stop. You say, I do not want to use this substance anymore. I don't want this in my body at all. And you completely stop. And stopping from a substance like opioid, and I use opioids because there's a big epidemic right now, specifically in New Jersey, of the use of semi-synthetic opioids are opioids that are mixed with different types of chemicals. And then you have opioids that are straight, pretty much raw, which are pure. And those are the ones that are on the street. So what I want to say with that is, you cannot stop that type of drug without getting any help. And I would not suggest it. I don't know if anybody's had surgery. I've had surgery before, and I've been given semi-synthetic type of opioids, which are like oxycodone, those types, and those can become addictive. I know people that started using painkillers, and then those are the pain relievers, and they start using chemicals out in the street like fentanyl and going to dope and heroin. So you imagine myself having surgery and having to take something like that, and after a couple of days I already felt like I still needed it, and that's something prescribed. So that's one of the biggest things that people talk about is prescription. And with withdrawal, I would say always try to seek help. I mean, there's a lot of different resources. You have SAMHSA, which is the Substance Alliance of Mental Health Association. If you ever need any help, you can reach out to that, and I'll give it some more of those. And you can actually say, hey, listen, I'm looking to quit using this type of drug, and actually get yourself in clinic. I would say, like, stopping, if it's something like maybe nicotine or alcohol, and it's something that you don't consume daily, then it could be easier. But if that's something that you are consuming on a constant, your body's going to show.
Denese, I thought it was great that you brought up the opioid epidemic that's happening in New Jersey. And I think it's the perfect segue because I currently work for a hospital in New Jersey,
This
and
is
I'm
Jersey.
constantly getting trainings about this whole opioid epidemic. So I personally think that it differs from the crack epidemic, and I wanted you to speak on that. And can you just kind of chime in on how you see the differences of how professionals handle the crack epidemic versus the opioid epidemic?
I actually wrote a paper a couple years ago because I know that where you work at is one of the places that they started something called the ALTO Act, and the ALTO bill is called the Alternative of Opioid Use. Now in Paterson, New Jersey, alongside with Cory Booker and I think Senator Rob Menendez, they spent over $30 million looking for alternate of pain, specifically when people come into the emergency room. The first thing that happens in emergency rooms are usually car accidents or unexpected accidents. So now they're using alternatives other than people who have cancer or different types of immunodeficiencies that might need these type of opioids for pain reasoning, right? So I thought that was interesting that because of a situation where there was like, I think it was crazy. It was like 40 to 50% of people were using opioids, that they actually had a grant for $30 million to do research to say, hey, listen, let's look at different alternatives like pressure points, like vitamins, just natural things. $30 million that they focus on opioids.
About
versus
time.
we talk about the crack. I'm sorry.
No, sorry. Go ahead. Keep going.
No, it's fine. Versus the crack epidemic, and that those times, which you're talking about the 70s and 80s, that when Richard Nixon came into office, he did, the Drug Enforcement Act and the war on drugs. And what happened in 1970s, they classified and scheduled drugs as a schedule. Marijuana was the number one scheduled drug, right? And then you have cocaine that wasn't in Schedule 1, Schedule 2 or 3. So then you start to look at what things are being put into place, like the Drug Enforcement Association, which is the DEA. They look at scheduling, medical professionals look at scheduling, and legalities look at scheduling of drugs to classify offenders and felons under these schedules and restrictions. So when you talk about the war on drugs, you're talking about a situation where there was a lot of underlining discrimination, a lot of substitute words and usage to kind of like identify their targeting to Black people. I think there was one of the campaign aligned politicians that were along Nixon that years later said that the war on drugs was code for the war on people of color, specifically Black people. So I think that the two differentiators are that we are in a more kind of equity kind of side of things now, that people are, looking at drugs and seeing the non-stigma of rehabilitation, the non-stigma of using methadone or using different types of medicines to help people, and then the discriminatory factor of it. Then we go back to that. It was kind of a situation in 1970 where the 70s and 80s that we're coming off of the 60s and early 70s, where a lot of groups like the Black Panthers, you have Angela Davis, you have Fred Hampton, and we know that they were combating the rights and extremist Black nationalism to kind of take away, like what they did in California with Reagan. So you have all these kind of factors that people are starting to see. Black people kind of say, listen, I'm tired of this. I don't want this. So what happens? They start using policies and drugs within the administration to kind of factor in conversations around it. Then you have 1980s where they say, don't say no to drugs. What is that? Say no to what? What was no? What, people need to have conversations of what addiction is, even though it's hard. And I have a son, and I know you're a mother too. It's hard to have these conversations, but people need to be aware of it. So I think that things are handled differently because there are more resources, there's more non-stigma, and then there's less focus on trying to bring a group of people down, which what I felt was happening then. And I felt like that was a lot. I mean, people were getting immense amount of years because of the Draco laws in the 80s. I mean, there's people still incarcerated to this day because of
that
the
was
amount
a big
of
part
drugs
of
that
our
they had.
episode as well. That was a big part of our episode as well, as the decriminalization of, the use of what was illegal, what's now legal, to try and make it right, or make it fit, make it make sense. If it's no longer illegal, then why should those same people be held, be punished for that? Now, switching back a little bit, doubling back down on substance use and resources on how to be a healthier you. What would you say? What's your thoughts on hotlines or support groups actually being confidential? Now, I'm a TV buff, okay? And I know TV doesn't necessarily translate to real life, but I'm watching the Breaking Bads, I'm watching the Snowfalls, I'm watching all of those shows, and
Powers of it,
you said
the
what?
narco.
You said Narcos? Y-
I
Those
said narcos and powers and just more shows focused on drugs.
Yes, shows focus on drugs in general, or again, just substances, alcohol included. I've seen a lot of shows where it's, someone is just a functional drunk or a functional alcoholic. But I would say though, with that is those groups that you go, Alcohol Anonymous and things like that. Would you really think that people can trust in those groups, or yeah, what do you have to say about those resources?
I mean, I do think there is a trust level because everyone, specifically when you talk about like AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, or Narcotics Anonymous, a lot of people that do attend these things, some of them are drug court mandated, which they kind of have to attend these meetings to kind of fit a requirement of the program they're in to be in parole and probation. So you have those set of people. Then you have people who are really needing that camaraderie and really needing that venting. And I think you can trust those spaces. I know that there's a lot of alternative different groups like called Smart Recovery, which has like emotional, it's called Albert Ellis. He is a theorist that came up with something called emotional rational therapy, which is emotive rational therapy. And what I like about those type of groups is that when you look at these other groups where you talk about if you can trust people, a lot of times you have to introduce yourself like you're an addict all the time. You have to say, hi, my name is, Denise, and I am an alcoholic. Hi, my name is, and I think with Smart Recovery, they use terminology different. They use words to replace those negative, even though that is a part of who you are, who you were, but that doesn't make you all that you are. Mm-hmm. And I think with certain groups, you can trust people in there, but you got to be careful because you have groups of people that are going for embetterment, and those people that are going to kind of fill a requirement for not to go back to jail, not to get locked up. So you got to kind of really understand what you're getting yourself into and go for you. Mm-hmm. So I would say it's the blurred line. You can trust, but you got to be careful who's in there for themselves or to fit a requirement, usually for drug court or to get their children back as well. A lot of times parents have to go that suffered from substance use, have to go to these certain groups to be able to get their children back from somewhere like the Department of Family and Child Services. And they have to have these requirements of therapy as well. So I think just keep your eye open for what you want. I mean, substance use is a very difficult thing.
Now, still on the subject of that trust level, I want to talk about sponsorship because I'm not familiar with the entire process. But again, TV buff, I watch All American, Good Trouble on Freeform, things like that. And that's a huge storyline in a lot of those shows. And so with that though, it's sponsorship. When you get a sponsor, someone who's supposed to keep you, I guess, off the ledge when you're on the ledge to get you off the ledge. But there's also been in those same storylines, cases where the sponsor may not pick up, or they're not available, or they cannot be to your ever beck and call. So with that, because, I just question because of that, the whole idea of that, because if someone is the only thing stopping you from going back to the bottle or going back to that next hit, is it doing more harm than good? Should we get rid of sponsors altogether? Should it be more focused on programs? I just want to get your thoughts.
I love that question because that's something that I struggle with to question because I do lead groups. So I do groups with different people who are substance users and have mental health. And we do the principal steps of AA. And some of them have sponsors and some of them don't. And I do think that in the scope of the way that everything is evolving, people need to take a little bit more accountability because when we look at someone who has suffered from use, they have a codependency to every single thing, to their sponsor, to their therapist, to whoever's going to listen to them if they're not fully healed. Now, I'll give you an example. I have a client who has a lot of different variations of things going on, little bit of use, and it's like a codependency. If I don't speak to this person or get back to them, they feel like everything is kind of out of control. And I do think with substance use, people have to take a little bit more responsibility when they're strong enough. What I say with that, sponsorship is okay, but it's like a peer help, like your friend and your buddy who's kind of gone through that. But you have to do the work. You have to make sure to know what triggers you, what's your stressors, what places and people not to be around. When you change your whole life, you have to change everything around you. And sometimes it's very hard to do that if you're in a very poor social location. Imagine you trying to get off drugs, crossing the street and at the White Castle in Patterson, and someone there trying to sell you drugs. Let's just give that example. How do you change that when you don't have support financially, when you're a felon and you don't have those resources like other people have? So I think that's a great question. I do think that they're doing something called, they tried to change the name of it. It's kind of like a peer support now. They don't call it sponsor, because even the word sponsor sounds like that person's giving you something for you to prove yourself to them. Like when you have a sponsorship in a podcast, right? It's an alignment, but that person's believing in you, right? And giving you an incentive to really see if it's going to work out. I think it's something called that they're using is like peer support. And I think that might be better, kind of using the words and the way that we change things. But I do think that it can be harmful if you don't know who you are. You don't know if you're an enabler or a codependent, and you haven't handled those type of personality traits. And I say this to say, because I understand it very, very well. I work with people. I myself have seen it within my family, and I have been through things myself that I've noticed about my personality, that I can't put myself in certain predicaments, just in general. And you have to kind of know that about yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think that one thing that I want to do more with group is kind of teach people the core of who they were before all of this. And that's very hard to find in the mess of trauma, in the mess of being broke, in the mess. It's hard. And I think that I talk about that, like how was certain people able to get over things? You know what I mean? It's hard for some, it's not easy.
And I know Ari brought up a couple examples of good shows to watch, like Good Trouble. And I personally wanted to ask you, because you talked about urban areas and resources, where is there any like financial grant for these resources for people that aren't mandated to go to seek help?
So right now there's a website called, and I have it here, it's www.addicted.org. So the addicted.org gives you use statistics, and anything that's Medicaid or anything, if you don't have any job or anything, you can look up any type of program that could be compliant as far as the rehabilitation. Now, as far as agency programs, there's so many of them everywhere. So these are some of the ones that we talk about. We talk about drug court. Drug court is a way that if you have to take a lesser type of crime. And what happens is with drug court is that they say, okay, you've sold marijuana, you sold whatever substance, you're going to have to go to this program, learn about it, you keep yourself clean. And then if you do these meetings and you kind of fix yourself, then you don't have to go back to jail. So there's a lot of these programs, but those programs are not only for people who are mandated to kind of fit this requirement not to go back into incarceration. There's so many different programs that people don't know about. And if you don't have any money, all you have to do is look up addicted.org and they'll give you everything. There's directories state by state, there's services, there's payment options, even grants within it. If you don't have Medicaid, that you do something. Something else people don't know too. And I think that especially when you go through like something like a driving while intoxicated or driving under the influence, once you're going through that, they send you to a center, and that center gives you all these different types of resources as well. You can look up anything in your state. And I think that because it's not in people's faces and we're not seeing it, they're not aware of it. So I would say go to addicted.org. They have so many different things that you can look for.
I'm just so happy that we're talking about what we can do to be better. So as people, if you are facing these issues and these hurdles, so definitely want to continue on the conversation of treatment and how to overcome. So with that, I have some statistics that I want to bring up, for the simple fact that substance use turn into substance abuse doesn't really affect you. It affects your loved ones. It affects your siblings, your spouse, your family, your children. And even to the point of, Denese, when you mentioned earlier, opioid. So I'll start with that first. Just like how you said with the it's painkillers, it's that addiction. So even the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, they report, and this is an older report, so things are probably have heightened since then, but it reports that a number of babies born with opioid withdrawal syndrome, that's i.e. mothers who have abused painkillers or heroin while pregnant, at the time between 2000 and 2012, it had quadrupled over the past 15 years. So it has a 500% increase. And then another statistic, ladies, before I would like for you to chime in, obviously, is that back to what you also mentioned earlier, Denese, was Sam Hissa, that's how I'm pronouncing it, that reports that children of alcoholics are as much as 4 times more likely to become alcoholics themselves. And so this is comparing them to children who live in sober families. Like, to bring it all out, let's lighten up the little sober party here right now. To talk about that it's not all bad. There has been great succession and great statistics on how people who have dealt with this are really getting invested to better themselves and what you are up against. So let's just definitely be transparent with this. But these are some statistics that I've pulled together about talking about what's also reality, which is relapsing potentially in that, trying to succeed in that. So according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, addiction may actually have slightly lower relapse rates than hypertension that a lot of also people of color deal with, just because of the things we eat in our diet, etc. But with that, they recommend that, and I want to get your opinion on this, Denese, that treatment, anything fewer than 90 days, you are more than likely to relapse. The old stigma of 28 days or 30 days for that is kind of gone away, but definitely 90 days is like the minimum you should do. I kind of just want to see if you agree with that, if you think that the longer the better, what to do if you do relapse. Just to close it out, Denese, what would you say for those questions?
I would say, if when it comes to succession rate, there are people that are successful in treatment. There are people that have been able to manage their stress, get healthy relationships, and really find themselves in who they really were. You know what I mean? Then you have situations where you talk about when people relapse, that you can't, if you fall down, you got to pick yourself back up again. You have to go back into therapy. You have to understand what happened, what was your stressors, and really figure out what's your long-term decision. Because some people that don't finish what their choice of substance, their life can end and they're in jail. And there's people that last so many years doing that. And I ask myself that question when I look at my clients. I say, what is the difference between me and them? Why were they're not able to, some of them are not able to kick a habit. And I did. I stopped drinking going on 7 years. And I know how it is to be that person. And I changed. And I changed because I found out to my core, and I took accountability of who I was and who I wanted to be. My life was very different 7 years ago, what it was going to be until it is now. But I made the decision to say, hey, you know what? I was always this great, passionate, loving, confident person. And why can I still be that person? And I think that's what I try to instill in my clients. You mess up, it's okay. It's okay. You have to kind of understand that that's what's going to happen. And I think that's why I do so much, because I feel like I wasted so many years being average, and I'm not going to be that person anymore. And I see my clients and I'm like, that could have been me. And it's not. What is the difference? I've had great support. I've been fortunate to have degrees. I've been fortunate to have education. I've been fortunate to want to pursue that change. And I think it starts with wanting to.
Nobody can force you.
No, exactly.
Nobody.
Denese, I appreciate you so much for coming on our show. I mean, you're a friend to the show.
Always been.
Me and Ari always talk about you. We call you the encyclopedia. We call you the plug. You got resources for days.
Not even gonna lie, Shirlz was like, Denese would be a great guest.
You do a lot.
Yes.
I love you, girls.
It's not just substance abuse work, but you do a lot with the podcast. And you're a proud Afro-Latina. You do a lot with that community. So shout out your plugs.
What can we look forward to in the future?
Yes. So, I'm glad I was able to be here and share that with you guys. Something I don't share a lot, but it's the reality of it. And I'm very okay with it. And I love you girls. Thank you for having me. I appreciate your show. I love what you guys do. And you guys could just look forward to me doing a lot of work with technology and advocacy and social work, and also continue my Podcasters New Jersey incubator group, which is going on 2 years, March 26th. Yes. I have 440 members. It's kind of gone really, really crazy. I love it. And then also I launched my podcast network, Podcasters Unlimited, which I launched in the summer of 2020.
Which
and I'm cultivating that because I'm very busy.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to juggle everything. But I will say one thing that I'm super proud of is that we actually have a summit. It's called Podwork, launching a podcast network. So we want more people to launch podcast network. We want more people to know what it's about. It's on May 22nd. I'm super excited. It's from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. I have people like Podchaser. I have people like Podfun. I have someone super important that's coming on that's going to be talking. I have BMI who's coming through to talk about copyright. I have a lot of different types of just things that people need to know, because I had to figure out a lot of things along with Ann. And shout out to Ann, I couldn't do it without her. She's the president of Podcasters Unlimited. And, we started this together. And also Steven, who advised us. So I'm super excited for everything that I got going, but I couldn't do that without believing in myself and having support. And I say to people that suffer from addiction or use, you know who you are. Just make sure to know what your history is, have you healthy relationships, and really look to yourself, because you can do it.
Denese, you also have to shout out your podcast, Pod Cipher, which me and Ari have been guests on. And I seen you guys have a new season and you're dropping episodes.
Yes, so that I know I'm just going off about a whole bunch of things, but yes, Pod Cipher is on season 2. I'm super excited. You guys were on season 1, and I hope to have you on season 2 again. We've been talking about things from mental health and within the pandemic, just different topics about the inauguration, things that have been happening with the new administration, policy change, and also pop culture. So thank you for reminding me, Pod Cipher. And we also have Podcasters Unlimited, which is a how-to. And we have that once a month, which is based on our Podcasters New Jersey meetup that we do virtually.
So as you can see, Denese is the Jane of all trades, but she tells her story and she tells it authentically. And we just wanted our listeners to understand that it can be anyone, and Denese is the what is it? The ox? What is it? What's that saying? I can't even think of it right now. But she's the one. She's the phoenix. No, she's the rising phoenix. She has risen to the occasion each and every time, and that is every one of our listeners here. So thank you, Shanice. I said thank you. Thank you, Denese, for I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but thank you, Denese, for appearing on the episode. And you are always a friend of the show. And and we will talk with you soon.
So I just want to personally thank Denese for coming and shedding a light on substance abuse and all within trauma within the pandemic. Shout out to Governor Murphy for actually legalizing marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
I know Ari and me, we definitely want to see the economic justice, the racial justice, and that goes for, Black people and people of color being at the forefront of having ownership, of having license, so that they can own dispensary.
Yeah.
Of course, we kind of touched on the Black market versus the dispensaries, but we want to see more of the taxes and what the taxes are going towards, whether that be for railroads, whether that be for drug prevention programs. Governor Murphy, he hasn't really talked about that yet. Mm-hmm. And of course, we want all the homies to be free from petty drug crimes, the expungement of records. So Ari, I want to ask you, do you have any recommendations when it comes to getting more information about marijuana laws within New Jersey or with marijuana laws within the United States of decriminalizing marijuana?
I definitely think that when it comes to aiding the decriminalization of anything that goes to people of color, definitely you can continue to follow the Black Lives Matter movement and their nonprofit org and their movement that's happening and does various changes in legislation monthly, weekly, daily. I think I can't stress it enough that we think that we know only when it's nationally recognized, and a lot more goes on beyond those curtains when you actually go to the sites and you look for yourself. So I do recommend those things, that website as a recommendation, but I definitely agree that when we are talking about legalizing recreational use of marijuana, when we're talking about getting rid of the stigma, when we're talking about substance use that turns into substance abuse, it happens in a matter of seconds. It happens in a matter of days of consistent use of these substances. And like we said, we have fallen victim to it, not of the abuse part, but more so that we drink, we smoke, we engage, and it's a fine line between, using it for recreation and then using it for a crutch or a need. And it's nothing wrong with it, but it only becomes something wrong with it when you don't do something about it and you see yourself on a decline and a demise. So we definitely recommend that you do something about it so that you can be the best boss, millennial boss, that you can be, and live in your most holistic way and reach the optimal climax of succession. So we definitely thank you for tuning in to another week of the Millenni-HER podcast, baked or behind bars. Be sure to subscribe to make sure you subscribe to our channel, our YouTube channel. Follow us on social media. Make sure you check out our website, our links in our bio on social media, and continue to support us via Patreon, via Cash App. Our support has been cursoring throughout our episode, and share with your friends, and make sure that you come back for another episode. See y'all.
Yeah.